This is Kristin Donnelly, one of the hosts of Everything Cookbooks. Today's episode is the last of a 6-part series during which we are re-releasing some episodes of our favorite past conversations on the topic of voice. In this episode, Andrea and I talked to Eric Kim, author of Korean American, one of my favorite cookbooks from the past several years. Eric's book merges food, memoir with cookbook in such a beautiful way. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Enjoy this episode, and we'll be back next week with a whole new lineup of episodes.
There's a lot of online chatter from people who don't want to know about a recipe writer's story. They don't want to get personal. But what is a good recipe without a good story? Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. This is Andrea and Wynn, and I'm here today with my co-host, Kristin Donnelly. Hey, Kristin.
Hey, Andrea. How's it going?
Well, thank you. What have you been reading and cooking from?
Well, it might have to do with our guest today. This book, Korean American, by Eric Kim. And I have a funny story about this book. So I buy a lot of cookbooks and I get them from publishers. This was a book that was on my list to buy. It had come out. It was a New York Times bestseller, ready to get it. And then my mom bought it for me for my birthday. The reason that is remarkable is because she doesn't usually buy me cookbooks because I think she assumes like, oh, Kristin has this. But she saw Eric on one of the morning shows and was just really taken by him. And she was like, I think this is a book Kristin's going to like. And she was so right. I think this is more of a coincidence, but the book is so much about his mother. I've just loved this book for so many reasons, and I'm very excited to talk to him.
Eric is an amazing editor, recipe developer, writer, and that book, Korean American, it's like the recipes are so well calibrated, you know? Mm-hmm. But in addition to that, he does this unique thing of weaving a very personal story into the book. Honestly, I want to know how he did it. Let's talk to Eric. We are so excited to talk to you about your beautiful and most intriguing debut cookbook, Korean American.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, there are so many cookbooks that come out each year, and yours just really took both Kristin and I by surprise. And it seems like you've been around for a long time. You know, you have this incredible career. You've taught writing courses. You were in a PhD program in literature, Food Network, Food 52, now the New York Times. And here you are, and you're writing a book. How is writing a book versus helping someone else with their words? How was that experience for you?
Editor to writer is certainly something that I'm always kind of baffled about, because on one hand, I do feel like I've been around, quote unquote, but maybe that no one was paying attention until recently. And the thing is, people often only pay attention to you when your byline is on the piece, which I think is a great shame that editors get edited out of the stories that they help produce. I think that relationship's really important. But so writing this book, it was really exciting because it felt like, before at Food 52, I was doing maybe a monthly column or so occasional pieces when I had time, but this was sort of saying, how about you take 100 of those and compile them? And so that was really exciting. And I think also having the space to write as much as I kind of wanted was really new for me. And there was a decision in the process where I could have cut recipes or essays, and I chose to cut recipes. So I don't know, it was just sort of, I knew that I wanted to focus on the writing. And I think writing in a different form that way, having all that space really, it was just such a fun challenge. It was something I'd never done before, but I don't know, it felt like I could do it because I had done it in spurts throughout my career, Mm-hmm. It's the columns I've been writing.
So you knew from the beginning it was going to be this more writerly cookbook?
Yeah, I think so, not least because that's what I was reading a lot of at the time. I really enjoyed Nigella Lawson's kind of loftier books, and by lofty I mean as in she has some more verbose ones, Feast is kind of something that I saw as a masterful piece of work, and I used it as a tome of mine at Food Network for all those years I was working on Easter and the holidays and Christmas and Thanksgiving and all that. But I think it's the kind of food writing that I was enjoying at the time. So I was like, what if I did this? Especially because it can feel kind of old fashioned to have like the memoiristic essay. But I think I'd say that I'd argue that that style is coming back now, and all their books are like this now. But there was a period where the cookbooks were more straight laced, and the memoiristic cookbook felt like a callback to like the James Beards or the Julia Childs of our time. And I don't know, I kind of like the timelessness of that. And Risotto with Nettles by Ana Del Conte was very influential for me. That's sort of a more straightforward like collection of essays, and each essay ends with a recipe. And I've been interested in the mixing of those forms because I think it just leaves a lot of room for voice and opportunity. And
you created a literary cookbook, and you created a story. There's like this drama that you built into it as the reader goes through the book from beginning to end. And it's highly original. I'm so glad you brought up the memoiristic cookbook, because you didn't write a memoir cookbook filled with essays that are punctuated by recipes. You wrote recipes that are punctuated by essays. And you have characters.
Yeah.
And you have drama. And there's a climax. And there's a denouement. There's all of those things. I hope that you meant that, because Kristin and I are super curious about, like, did you drop a book map? How did you do to construct this very intricate thing?
Thank you for such a nice question. It's funny because usually don't get to talk about this part of the cookbook process. And a part of me would feel very self-aggrandizing or silly to be like, yes, there was a book map. There's a narrative, and like, it's on purpose. But I think it came with the editing process. So, I always like to share that maybe like 10 to 15,000 words were cut. And it was fun to do that. It was sort of like making like a salt baked fish or something, and you're sort of cracking at the salt, outside. That exterior is like nice, but you need to end up with like a final fish. And sorry,
I love that.
It's a stupid metaphor. But I think that's kind of what happened. The form of like the drive and all of that became a little clearer. I knew I wanted to start the book with the drive. And actually, there was a whole section called The Drive, and it was a very boring litany of kind of landmarks I was passing. And it's like this, it's about this one drive, this one specific stretch of road on Beaufort Highway. It's like along 141. I was like, oh, this is so poetic. And I remember when I thought of it, I was in the car like crying. So I was like, oh, I love my family so much. And I'm glad it was cut, because like those are the things that need to be cut, things that are kind of just for you. I had to cut like many, many graphs before I got to that first sentence, which was like when I was 17 years old, I ran away from home. I was like, oh, that's really where it starts, I think, because I knew I wanted to end the book with me driving away, because that's how it ended. That's how I ended the book process. And I get emotional thinking about it, because it's sort of getting to really indulge in that feeling of leaving home. It's a hard feeling, but it's also really, sorry, I'm getting like, it's a very sentimental feeling. It's like a feeling that you feel once when you're 18 and then you never get to feel again. But this time, because I had been there for 9 months, it was a part of my day-to-day. It felt like I was 17 again. And getting to leave this time, I was able to appreciate it more. It's sort of like the movie 13 Going on 30. Actually, that's the opposite. I'm talking about the opposite of 13 going on 30. I was like 30 going on 13. And I was able to it was kind of cool to go back in time and redo it. But this time, like with actual gratitude for what a family means and stands for. So yeah, it's a very emotional process. And I think I'm really grateful for it. But I also, part of me, I still get emotional thinking about it. And I like to run past it sometimes when I'm talking about it, because it's uncomfortable. It's like, it's an emotion.
The home is a character in your book. It's a character that you bring up from the beginning. You close with it. You have many characters. You're the star, but so is your mother. Your father's like a co-star. You've got your extended family. You've got the Korean American community. And how did you style your prose so that you could be the narrator and the protagonist and the recipe developer and deliverance of, all of these things about your Korean American experience?
I feel like I can pinpoint the moment I realized this was a form that I could use. It was Food 52. When I was there, I published an essay about coming out to my parents over kimchi fried rice. And it was a personal essay that had food in it. And a lot of the quotations were like translations of the things that my parents said. And when you translate your parents' like Asian language, or, you know, in my case, Korean, I feel like it always comes out kind of like poetic and narrative and interesting. Like my mom says things that sound normal in Korean, but when you translate them to English, it's like a really interesting jump you make between cultures. You're like, oh, that's such an interesting culturalism. I think that essay helped me see what I wanted like a whole book of that to sound like and feel like. And my parents are just like characters. They're really easy to write about because they're ridiculous, but also really like heartwarming, and they have flaws. And I think I wanted my mom especially to be a fleshed out character and not like a flattened immigrant trope. That's like really easy to do when you're a child of immigrants and you're writing about your family. And I don't know, even now I'm very sensitive whenever I write the words growing up, because I'm always like, man, this is like, it has so much potential to go into this saccharine territory, and eyes can glaze over. I feel like I'm glazing over sometimes when I write like that, because I'm just like, I'm tired of writing about nostalgia a little bit, but I'm also obsessed with it. And I think the thing that really fueled this book was the strange phenomenon of going back in time. And it's bizarre. It's like weird to get to like live in your past, and that's your assignment. That involves family legacy for me. And actually in the beginning, I didn't want to be in the book that much. I was like afraid to write about Korean food, kind of. It's like, I was trying to tell my mom's story. I was trying to go at it from a reporter's perspective, but I think my editor, Raquel Pelzel, sort of kept reminding me that I am at the center of the book, and being at the center makes sense from a narrative perspective, but also I am a product of my mother's cooking. That's sort of a big thesis statement of the book, and that I was trying to point out. And here are the ways in which it's more complicated than that sounds. And diving into that is part of the story. And that's like, I want people to experience that too. It's like, it's a huge blessing to get to move back home and cook with your family. It's wonderful.
Was it always the plan to move back home for writing this book, or was that a product of the pandemic?
I was only supposed to go home for a month or two to work on the kimchi recipes, but it became a whole thing. Similarly to nostalgia, home is really hard to write about, I think. But the essays I was writing independently, trying to piece together a book, they all had a common theme. And I found myself really wanting to dig into this theme, but, with a little trepidation, because writing about home can be cheesy. And how many cookbooks, have the word home in them? And, food is the hearth of the home. Is that what people say? It's like, it's a cliche. So that was something that was hard. But it was like inevitable. It became so much a part of the experience of writing the book.
Yeah. What I love about this is there is so much you and your family, but it never feels self-indulgent. I feel like it's actually really generous, the way you write about the food. As a reader, I want to make everything. How did you balance that? The fact that you're writing about so much about yourself, but you do have all these readers who in the end might just want to make some kimchi.
I always say that my favorite kind of first-person writing is the kind of writing where the narrator sort of disappears almost, and you feel like you're part of the story, or you are the I as the reader. I think that's like a really successful piece of prose. I'm not sure I'm always able to manage it, but that's how I view first-person writing when it comes to recipes, especially like a book about family recipes. My purpose of like inviting people to my family's table is to invite them into the recipe, into the kitchen, and to be like, here's the background. If you know the background, maybe you'll care more about the dish. Not to mention selling that it's really delicious anyway, which is easy to do. But to get someone to really want to cook something that they've never had before, especially a cuisine that's maybe hasn't been covered as much, I think telling a story about, the time I got laid off, or telling a story about my grandmother, or like a family member who passed away, like it's kind of like a nice sell. it's like, oh, you don't want to cook this? Do you hate my dead uncle who sacrificed his life to take us trout fishing? I'm just kidding. I'm joking, of course. But I think this book was so fun because I really think I got to explore the potential and the limits of like memoir writing for food. I was like, what can I do? And how far can I go? Actually, I'm really excited about the next book because it's sort of the opposite. If the first one was like a cookbook that had some memoir in it, I'm thinking about like essays that happen to have recipes sprinkled in, but it's really about the long essay. And I'm still like expanding that form for myself. I'm like, well, what is possible here? It's like, I love like essays, the essay form, something we've been writing since third grade or whatever. It's like, whew, it never ends. every deadline. I had a deadline, like Monday that I missed, and I was like up all night writing this piece, and I'm like, this never ends. I'm just like always in school.
You always want to be the overachiever, the A student.
Yeah. Right.
I got to ask you because, I'm a refugee. I'm not an immigrant. I'm not the child of immigrants. I'm like, we all came over here at the same time, my family. But I have nieces and nephews who are the children of immigrants. I remember one time my nephew started calling his parents by their first names, and it like totally freaked me out. Both my husband and I were like, stop it, But you refer to your mom as Jean. When did that start, and how did she react to seeing that on the page?
That's a good question. I never asked her the nuances of like how she feels about that. But I don't actually call her that to her face. She's still Amma to me. I think it's interesting that I'm Chunho to her. I'm not Eric. Like, she only calls me Chunho. You have these like familial names, and the reason I call her Jean in the book is to establish like a character that you're going to follow throughout. She's such a big part of the book. She's the only one whose face really shows up in it. I was like really adamant about that. I didn't want my face in the book at all. I think when you name your parent, it just makes them more human. And one thing that I wanted to do with the book was demythologize like the parent figure. I feel like that's important to do when you're talking about a human being and their legacy, like culinarily. I've written about people's parents and had to ask them like, wow, we went like months talking about your mom, but what's her name? And that's like the last fact check. I'm just like, I don't know her name. It's like, why do I not know her name? Like, what's her first name? She's not just Miss, like whatever. But actually in Korean culture, they're referred to, especially mothers are referred to by their children. Like Eric's mom was at the party. It's like that. It's really
wow.
It's usually the first son. So they would say Kevin's mom. I think about that. It's like probably part misogyny, part like maternal sacrifice, which is like very revered in Korean culture. And like, anyway, it's complicated and more than I could probably speak to.
What was Jean's reaction to like reading her name in your book? Did she take a look at the manuscript? Because I always feel like when I write about my mom, she's always been mom, and she reads about herself, but she never ever comments.
Yeah. There's sort of a language barrier, so it's kind of sad. Like my mom will sort of be able to catch details, and she'll be like, oh, you talked about Sprite and pine nuts or something. But she talks about how she's not able to get the emotion out of it because of the language barrier. So, I really would love to have this book translated so that she could read it. And because I can show her a cover story in the New York Times. I'll like go to Publix and buy a copy or something, and I'll be like, look, Mom. She'll say something like critical or whatever about the photo or something, and it's I don't know, this is funny. It's like, I didn't think to criticize the photo. I was like talking about the writing, but so it's a work in progress. Yeah. Ultimately, I think she's happy because she has a little like local fame now. She's like, she doesn't care that everyone, like a lot of people out in the rest of the country know her. It's more that she has like friends and family members and like people who have been like following the book kind of from afar and like seeing me on TV and stuff. And I think it's like exciting for my mom in that sense. She's like, yeah, this is like a thing now. Yeah. And then she like had a lot of books to pass out and give to people, and because she did work on it.
Yeah, I was gonna say she was like in the trenches. I mean, reading about some of her recipe testing and her tweaking and basically codifying.
It's for her too. Like now her kimchi recipe is like immortalized, and it's truly like very delicious. I've developed kimchis after that, and my recipes just aren't as good. I'll be honest, they're fine, but they serve different purposes than hers, which is like to be awesome.
I thought it was interesting how it seemed like with the kimchi, because she usually or used to make it with a slurry.
My recipes now don't really have that rice slurry. I think there are many reasons for it, many good ones. They have to do it with everything from bacteria to like flavor. But I don't do it anymore, and I think people commented and they're like, that's not the traditional Korean way. And I was like, actually, did you know that there are a bunch of Koreans who are skipping that step? Because we all just want kimchi and we're sick of like how hard it is. It takes a long time, the really traditional way. But if I can offer like maybe a faster way that is good enough, but also like delicious in its own way, because like when you open up the scenario so that it's not so grueling every time you make a dish, it's like I feel like you end up making it more often. So I kimchi a lot of things now. It's been really fun and just like a nice way to reduce waste.
I moochimmed yesterday with your recipe. It was so delicious. I had this fruit that I was like, it's like good but not great, but then it became fabulous thanks to you.
Yeah, that muchim is like, I was doing it on a lot of crazy things like pineapple and mango and I had like a real fruit phase.
Yeah, absolutely delicious. And that's the thing, is that your recipes are delicious, but you come at them in a way that is very interesting language wise. For example, when you name things, like in the meatloaf glazed kalbi with the gamja salad, you could have said potato salad, you could have said meatloaf glazed kalbi with potato salad, and we would have gone like, right, we understand that because kalbi's in there and we understand that flavor. But you decided to use gamja in there. And I feel like it's just this balance between presenting authenticity and alienating or pushing your reader, your cook. What's up with that, Eric?
What an eternal question. I have it all the time. Just another example is I had a tenjang salmon rice bowl go up recently, and my editor, Genevieve, and I were like, what if we called it sweet and salty salmon? Which would have maybe clicked better, would have gotten people into the door, and then more people would have learned about tenjang. So, but then a part of me also wants tenjang to become a thing. So it's like, what if I actually put it in the recipe title? And so it goes from there. So it's like, man, I can't tell you how many versions of the titles I had. I had a whole spreadsheet. I was constantly going in there and changing the English words to like Korean words, changing back the Korean words to English and then back again. And the meatloaf glazed kalbi with kamja salad, that's like an example of me like finding some kind of like happy medium. I wanted people to know about kalbi, and I also wanted people to know about kamja salad, which it is a potato salad, but it's also kind of an egg salad. It's also just like really specific. The Korean one is a little different from the Japanese one, and it's always served in like an ice cream scoop. And I don't know. It is really encouraging though that those are the titles and dishes, like gochugaru shrimp with roasted seaweed grits, I think is what it's called. That did well. And it's just nice to see that you can put the real word in there and people will just like catch on. That was encouraging. And the meatloaf glazed kalbi, people like that, even if some of the words are like not recognizable to like, on first glance. It's all very political. And I ache over every decision for sure. Because on the other hand, I have a winter squash risotto in there that has chewy rice cakes because I like the sound of chewy rice cakes. But I could have said with duck, but I didn't. Mm-hmm. So that's arbitrary. It's like I like the sound of chewy rice cakes.
I thought about that one too, Eric. And I was like, if you put duck in there, TTEOK, who would know how to pronounce that? And I'm not even pronouncing kamja correctly because I learned in your book that like Korean roasted seaweed is really, that G is really sort of a soft K. Kamja, not Kim, but kamja. Now I'm like kimbap totally makes sense to me.
And to that point, Andrea, in that recipe title itself, kalbi and kamja, they're the same letter. It's the kiuk. But sometimes people say kalbi, sometimes people say it with a G, some people say it with a K. Koreans maybe arguably would say it with a mix between the two. It's really confusing. I think that's the interesting part about writing these recipe titles. You're like, I have to make a decision right now. And sometimes at the Times, I'm like, I have to make a decision for like the very first time this appears in the Times and whether or not I want it to be a K or a G. And it's like a lot of things go into that. It's so hard, right, Angie?
It is, because that cultural weight bears upon you when your audience is really big. And I have to tell you that even if you're colonized, like my people were, we just still mix things up. So it doesn't help. Don't worry. It's just, we can change things in the future, man. So, if we want to.
Just like run with it and go. When I first started cooking with those roasted seaweed, sheets, I was calling it nori because that was like the culinary term that I learned. Didn't even realize the politics of like, I shouldn't use a Japanese word to describe like a Korean product, first of all, but also like a Korean flavor that I'm trying to get across. But sometimes the recipe is Japanese and Korean, as many things are in our history. And so, yeah, I have to make a decision. I'll say something generic like roasted seaweed or something. It's political.
There's also these like questions of authenticity, I'm sure. Is that something you thought a lot about, or you're just like, I'm doing my own thing? And
that's the thing that kept me up the most, for sure. Like I got shingles once because I was so anxious about what other Koreans would think because they had been so vicious online to me. And
oh, wow.
I'm usually quiet about this kind of stuff because it's supposed to be a celebration. And I feel like that was a hurdle I had to get through to even write the book, because so much of the book was the process of learning that this is actually something to be celebrated. The mixing, the uncertainty about what authenticity even means, and ultimately the kind of like a belligerent defiance against it. I'm really proud of like where I've landed, which is I recognize as a culinary historian that there are many ways to arrive at a cuisine. And I realized just how limiting it was to gatekeep a cuisine like this. It like limits us and it upholds some like white supremacist kind of ideal of what food should be. So my whole mantra, and that's the part of the book, the introduction, that I wrote the last, because it was the hardest to write, and it's a hard place to arrive at, to a point where, you know, I still get comments like that. If it's not about a Korean dish, it's about like a spaghetti al pomodoro or something like really simple. But people have very strong feelings about their cuisines, and a part of me is having trouble writing the next book because I think I'm just still recovering from the first one. It's like, it was such a political process for me personally, and just draining, ultimately rewarding, but really taxing in that regard.
What was it like for you to be on morning television, to like present Korean American to a very broad, very mainstream audience?
Good question. It's funny because I just like feel like I black out after those. It's sort of like, I think I've always been quite lucky in that sort of been able to just like focus on whatever the dish is. I would say like each step of the way, I was just like surprised at how open TV people are. I've made things like the salt and pepper pork chops with the muchim, the scallion muchim on top. I think I was like creating these recipes, thinking about audience, but not really picturing how much people would just embrace it. All these words that maybe people weren't familiar with before, they're down for it when they see it and they taste it. And I think it's also a self-selecting book. People who buy it are going to be the people who will go and seek out the ingredients, which I kind of like.
Soon thereafter, I mean, Korean American was a bestseller, right?
Yeah.
That was amazing. I cried.
Good.
There's all this like pent up emotion and energy. And it's funny, like when I got the book deal, I was like, am I supposed to be crying right now? Like I always imagined this moment, but it's actually very like, it's a slow burn. And then towards the end, you're like standing in front of your apartment window on like a FaceTime call with your publisher. And you're like, oh, this is the moment I'm going to cry. It's like, it's just like so much pent up energy that doesn't get released. And then there's like one moment. There were multiple moments actually. All the Uber rides, I was like crying. My book had plenty of errors, but it was more the essays. I was like, I'm debuting as a writer and I want to be taken seriously as a writer. I'm not happy with the writing yet. So they gave me like a few more days. It was nice.
Let's talk about those essays. Kristin was very intrigued by the stew one, for example.
Yeah, the gentle boiling. Describing gentle boiling is really beautiful. Actually, I think I wrote it down just so we can have a little reference point here. There's a rapid simmer and a rolling boil. Then I'd place the gentle boil in between those. In a gentle boil, the bubbles are brisk and vociferous, but controlled and even. There should be no chance of bubbling over. Look for something between small bubbles and big bubbles that are quick to pop. I was like, how long did it take him to come up with that description? I feel like there was a lot of staring at pots or something.
Thank you for pointing that out. That took forever to write. That was like, I went through so many changes. That section used to be called rapid simmering or something like that. Rapid simmer. I called it something else. I was trying to name that concept because it's a very specific temperature to me, and that doesn't exist in recipe writing in the United States anyway. And I was just like, how do you show that gradient in between that like all moms know how to do, and like that it's really essential to these stews? It's slightly more than like a quiet like simmer. One of the only ways to describe, you know, this temperature is to talk about the bubbles. And so I was like looking at the bubbles. I was like, what are these bubbles doing? And because, you know, we write these recipes, we're like, bring it down to a low simmer or simmer or whatever, boil. Like a lot of people don't know what that means. It's sort of like when an ex-boyfriend kind of asked me in one of my recipes, he was like, what does soft peaks mean or stiff peaks? And I was like, that was a moment in my life when I didn't know why I was writing that. And then later in life, when I did educate myself, I was like, okay, I'm going to describe this in my recipes now. And so whenever I have a meringue, I describe, dip your whisk into the thing and flip it over and look at the peak. And is it this or is it like a Santa hat? So I use that language now because I'm like, yeah, we just take it for granted that people know these things. And so it makes it more equitable or something. It's like, I think it's important to like include everyone, and everyone has a different knowledge base. I never like to assume. I do think the conversation in the last couple of years has been gearing towards like a more well-rounded education culinarily, and acknowledging that the French way isn't the only way. I think the more we say it, the better it is. But it all has to do with culinary diplomacy, don't you think? It's like
certain cultures have been historically just prioritizing getting the word out about their cuisine, like in a bigger way. So I don't know. It's all interesting. It's all relative. I think people who are trained in the Italian way are people I usually like align with personality wise. Like Samin Nosrat loves Italian cooking, and Jeremy Umensky is at Larder in Cleveland, Ohio, and he kind of learned a lot in Italy when he was training as a chef. And I like when people have like diverse backgrounds with their cooking, because it also just makes you a better cook. You realize how many preconceptions that you have going into the kitchen, and it helps you sort of like break them a little bit, which is important to do.
100%.
And that's the thing about these recipes are, again, you know, the purpose of the book is to center the Korean American experience, but also to create these bridges where it's generalizable. It's like globalized, normalized in a way. And I think that when you're writing about a cuisine that isn't straight up Mediterranean, Italian, French, or even Japanese, you know, what people think of as like these sort of definitive cuisines, you kind of like got to elbow your way in, but then you also got to do it softly.
Yeah.
Right?
Make them cry.
And cry a little. And then, you know, and like stay up late at night, wake up in the middle of the night. There are a couple of essays that really got me, aside from the S's for stew. One is Nest, and then the other is Feast. So the Nest one is about rice. And I feel like that's like smack dab in the middle of your book, right? And then that's like where you break away from your mom with kimchi fried rice in that chapter, in like the staple that's like the soul of who you are. And that you're like, I'm going to fly from the coop now. And then from there, we see you liberated, and the recipes like evolve into this like kind of kaleidoscopic thing, like a beautiful sweater that you would, or shirt that I've seen you wear on Instagram. And so it's like becomes like you. Beyond that, I don't know if I'm reading too much into that or what, but I thought that that was so beautiful. And that from Nest, which is about rice, you go into Feast, which is about Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, by the way, about that essay. I remember developing that recipe in the middle of the night. You know, maybe I had like a glass of wine or two. I was like dancing around the kitchen because I was so happy with how delicious it was. I was like, I just unlocked a new taste for myself. And it was from just wanting to create a fried rice that was like a little different. And I never know that I have another kimchi fried rice in me, but I sometimes do. And so I did another one this year on a shape pan, which is like even easier. But I think with these essays, and especially you're talking about the Feast essay, I think I wanted to contextualize kind of like how momentous some of these recipes are to me. And I think a way to do that was to like contextualize it with, you know, some writing. And that Feast chapter, I really love that essay because it sort of is the moment in my book I get to honor the people who have died in my life. And I was thinking about death a lot during this book. It was sort of a constant theme, and not in a bad way, but I think it's with COVID, I was thinking about it a lot, but I'm thinking about like the legacy of my parents and how it sort of ends at them. And one way to make things more permanent is to write it down. And I like that chapter because I think it's sort of like a mini like family cookbook. It's like all the relatives, like greatest hits. It's like the things that we've been eating since we were little. And kind of some of them are just like as they are too. You know, they're very like just pure.
And they're very American in like the most Technicolor American way. They're really like textured and they're delicious. I mean, because I've made several of them while I was working on that story that included you for Food and Wine, the Thanksgiving piece. And I was just so taken about the totality of that chapter and your flavors and how calibrated everything was, because I felt like the recipes, finally, there was a place for me and Asian cuisine in a very sincere, genuine way on a Thanksgiving menu. And I felt like that's where like, oh yeah, like, you know, there he goes. He's like Korean American, perfect combination. Here it is. And it's for everybody.
I think it's a good point in that I could have focused on a lot of other holidays. I almost wrote a Christmas essay, but didn't have time. But the Thanksgiving menu was perfect in that I do agree that it's such an American holiday, but something that we really folded into our lives. We do Thanksgiving hard in my family. And so it's like, and I love the ways in which it's grown and changed. And our table has dishes that other tables don't have. And it's not just because we're Korean, it's because we're just a different family. And like, I think that's why I like Thanksgiving. Some people see it as an oppressive holiday. And I think it probably is for a lot of people, and it kind of is in many ways, but I see it as like a construct in which to like build. And I like developing those recipes because it was sort of my time to really like milk it. It's like food media, baby. I've been in food media for years and that was my first Thanksgiving menu. So I was like, I reeled it in, I think. Like, it's not as crazy as it could have been, but I'm really proud of that menu. Yeah.
So how crazy would you have made it? What did you cut?
Well, okay, I went back to my old photos actually, and I found a dish that I totally forgot about. But it's not in the feast chapter, but it's sort of like a nod to japchae, but instead of the glass noodles, it's pasta. It just never came together. It was like a sheet pan of vegetables that you roast, and it was maybe like sheet pan bibimbap, but instead of the rice, it was noodles, and it just never came together. And I saw the picture of it, and I was like, I remember when I cut that because I was like so glad to cut it because I hated it. But what's really fun about the recipes you cut is that you always rework them and kind of add them in later. And I have a tteokbokki recipe that came out in the New York Times recently, and I'm really proud of that recipe, but it was one of those recipes that just wasn't ready, and I hated it. And I was like, this will never see the light of day. And then one day I was like, okay, I'm going to revisit it. And now it's a Times recipe, and I really like it. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Is there a recipe for a viral recipe?
I've learned in my life and my career that there's no guessing. There's no way to know. There's not that many reasons, in my opinion, for a gochujang glazed eggplant with like a really annoying, laborious fried scallion garnish to like become the thing. But it did. And it always like surprises you. And meanwhile, things that you think are going to be the next thing don't do well. And you're just like, you can never guess. I don't know. And I think that's what's fun. People always surprise you. And I've been in so many editorial rooms where we're trying to guess the next viral thing. And that's the point of virality. It just like happens. You can't predict it. And it's like, you can put in like all the right things, but you know, a Powerpuff Girl doesn't always come out.
I mean, cause I don't know, is it like you take, an ingredient that's super familiar and then a classic with a twist. I was reading something Pete Wells wrote about Martha Stewart. Beautiful review in the New York Times. So good. And he said, what she does is classics with a twist.
Yeah, it's smart.
I mean, this is not a classic with a twist, but it takes a very, ingredient that people don't have a lot of and they don't know what to do with. And you've got a flavor that is extremely au courant, and it's relatively easy, and it's fun, and it's delicious
and beautiful.
I think your moochum should go viral, but I don't know.
I think it's a matter of also like, what does viral really mean? I think like to older generations, it might be like, this is how you measure your success. Like, but that's not how I measure success, but it was like the quickest way to describe the phenomenon of like putting out a recipe that's private and then now it's public. And then it's like the thing that you see the most when you open your phone. That's like kind of bizarre when it happens the first time. And also developing recipes, I'm always trying to strike this balance of like simple and surprising / more intricate. Sometimes the simple is the most delightful. It's like, it's the most surprising. It can like really show you something new. But from the outside, if you just look at an Instagram post or something, it might seem like that simple thing is just too simple. And you're like, oh, I know how to do this already. Why is there a recipe for this? But it's like, no. If you read the head note, you see that I'm adding this tiny minutia to the conversation. It's hard to get people to like read, and reading that head note or the recipe through is like the only way to know why that exists. And for me, that's sort of always been my standard for a recipe. Like, I'm not going to put out something that already exists because it's like, what's the point? I already have so much anxiety about like influence and like, legacy and like following in people's footsteps. And I mean, my desk is like across from like Melissa Clark and Julia Moskin and stuff. It's like crazy. It's like striking the balance between communicating enough to let people know like why this exists, and just being kind of cool and being like, oh, I just did a thing. It's like,
yeah, no, that's part of the voice that you have that is so intriguing. And I think it's provocative. Yeah. So there's an epilogue in the book. Why did you decide to have an epilogue?
Okay, the reason that's there is because that was the introduction originally, and it was just like this really intense essay I wrote in the very beginning, and it felt good, and it sort of described the concept of home very well. But I think when I wrote it and filed it, Raquel and I were like, this is like not an introduction really. I think we're trying to force it into an intro, but it was too like separate. It's kind of like a behind the scenes maybe a little bit, but just like finalize my thoughts about when I'm thinking about regarding home and family. And I also describe it as there's sort of an emotional manipulation that happens when you write like memoir. Like, that what's going to make people cry. And like, I'm not saying I do it like deliberately all the time, but the epilogue definitely is the place where it's like a stab in the stomach and then the twist at the end. And I'm aware that that's what I'm doing, but I think it's an accurate level of like intensity to match like what I went through and what I wanted other people to experience. It's like ultimately that's what I wanted to get across. I was like, this feeling that you're feeling right now, like this is what I went through and what I want you to also experience. If you should be so lucky to have your parents with you, and if you don't, then that's also an experience I read about. And that was fun. That was a fun essay to write. That was where a lot of the words were cut out. Actually, it was really long and it had like Harry Potter like analyses and like references to Kiki's Delivery Service and Raquel was like, it's like maybe save this for another time. I like the way that ends because I think it's also where I'm going to start the next book.
If the pandemic hadn't happened and you didn't spend the 9 months at your parents' house, how would that epilogue been different?
Man, I don't know. The whole book would have been different. It would have maybe had more reporting. It would have had more people's stories. The epilogue probably wouldn't have existed, or it would have like been a different kind of situation. It's funny when you're writing something and you're so just like, you have a whole room filled with, like in Little Women, the Greta Gerwig version where like all the papers are like lined up. It's sort of like that, and you can only your editor's like, you can only keep like half of these pages, and you're like, oh, okay. And then so it's interesting, and that's a really good exercise. Like people need to be edited more. You need to cut words. Like I write this like 800 word column for the New York Times Magazine every month, and every time I tackle it, I'm always like the same like college student who's stuck, at like midnight looking at the blank screen and being like, oh my God, I have to write 800 words. And what's really great is when you have 1,000 words and you know that you have to cut 200 before you file, and that always just makes it way better. And I think editing is really important, and I'm grateful to Raquel for reeling me in because I was in a very sappy, sentimental place.
Well, I think that sappiness and being emotional is something that we've all come to truly reveal our inner selves these days. You've shared so much of yourself in the book and also with us today. And we just want to thank you, Eric Kim, for coming on Everything Cookbooks with us.
Yeah, thank you.
It was so fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. If you've got a question or a comment, send us a note through our website, everythingcookbooks.com, or ping us on Instagram at everythingcookbooks. And if you've got a minute to spare, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Thanks so much to our editor, Abby Circatella. Thanks for joining us today. Until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.